Hello dear students, welcome to this class of MA Final, paper 5th B, that is American Literature. I am Dr. S.S. Vaidwan, Department of English. Dear students, as in the previous video, we discussed Walt Whitman, his life, his education and his philosophy. Today, we'll discuss about Walt Whitman's Leaves of Grass and especially the preface to Leaves of Grass. Whitman, as you all know, he describes his philosophy in this Leaves of Grass. And R.W. Emerson, he said, and I quote, "This is no book. Who touches this touches a man," unquote. So this second edition of Leaves of Grass, it was published with 33 poems. So a collection of 33 poems, and it was published in 1856, the second edition. And Emerson, he wrote this compliment. Now this poem, it has made Whitman stand with the romantic poets like Shelley and Wordsworth. So this is how this great book of poetry, Leaves of Grass, it has shaped Whitman into a national poet and an international figure at par with poets like Shelley, Wordsworth, and Keats. So this poem, it also has a preface, and in the preface to Leaves of Grass, Whitman declares that America, it encloses the past and the future, and that Americans have probably the fullest poetic nature, unquote. So this prophecy by Whitman, it proved true, and American poetry became established, and it was Whitman to whom the credit goes. And as I told you that he is he is often called the father of free verse. So the poetry, this American poetry, it now followed this style of writing, and the credit goes to Walt Whitman. We can say that Whitman's focus on in this poem, in this collection, his focus is on the identity and aesthetics of the poet. That is the search for identity, and he describes America as a nation still in process of creating itself. The nation that is evolving still. So he clearly declared in his poetic works that America is still evolving as a nation. Now, this calling America a teeming nation of nations, he calls America a teeming nation of nations, and how it is distinguished by the other nations. Whitman says that all the characteristics of the common people, they are described in this important composition. Whitman declares, and I quote, "They are the unrhymed poetry," and that America, it has evolved as a dynamic variety consisting of different species of people. Now, the poet, he calls it a dynamic variety of America. And we can say that the poet Walt Whitman, he declares that, I quote, of all nations, the United States, with veins full of poetical stuff, must need poets and will doubtless have the greatest and use them the greatest. Unquote. The preface, it also takes into consideration the American identity, and it also focuses on the details and the characteristics of a poet. And uh, Whitman, he says that the greatest poet, he uses this epithet, the greatest poet. Now this preface, it also can be said, can be termed as a song of America. The poet, he transcends nationality, and also we can say that he is a mythic poet. The poet, Whitman says, is also a seer who guides his people into visionary knowledge. So we can say that Whitman, he goes on to say that the people, they expect more from the poet, from the writer, from the writer of poetry. So this purpose is central of this theme in the preface. And Whitman, he says that freedom is not only political freedom, it is also the spiritual freedom, it is also the freedom from the burdens, the turbulences of life. The poem, the form of this poem is very crucial, and the rhyme and the uniformity, it shows the free growth of metrical laws, that is the use of free verse, of which Whitman was master, and is often called the father of free verse. Similarly, we can say that this publication also brought out from the Emersonian effect. The poet says that truth, it cannot be imposed. Truth, it cannot be imposed. It comes from within. The poet writes that, I quote from the poetic lines, that truth, it comes from within. It cannot be imposed. Walt Whitman, he says that science is very important, but poetry is also important. Science is definite, but it is the poet's imagination that makes us, enlighten us, and liberate us. He insists that science, it can check movements, it should be encouraged and supported, but poetry is also to be enjoyed, and it has also to be respected. Walt Whitman says that whether man, woman, nature, or any form of literary writing, it demands freedom. And he says that the role of a poet is, it must be a role of a liberator and a creator. I quote from Walt Whitman, the idea of political liberty is indispensable, and the attitude of great poets is to cheer up slaves and horrify despots. So, because he was against the slave movement, he was against this slavery. He wanted to this slavery to be abolished from America. And this line, he describes his philosophy, his thought about slavery also. And the preface, in its conclusion, Whitman presents a apocalyptic vision. He mentions priests in particular, and he says that every man shall be his own priest. Every man shall be his own priest. And the poet, he says that this preface, it points out towards freedom, freedom from slavery, freedom from all these despots, and we should respect and pay attention to the humans. That is why Whitman is called a humanist. So we can say that this preface, it remains a very critical document in the history of American poetry. Dear students, I hope you have understood the outline of this preface to the Leaves of Grass. We'll continue with this in much detail in the next video. Thank you very much.